We always hear change your habits, change your life, right? But no one actually tells us which ones actually matter. So today I'm going to go through the ones that have really actually quietly shifted my life. They've changed how I think, pray, rest, move and show up. And the science backs it. So let's walk through them one by one. So firstly, I decided to start living with purpose, right? So we're wired for meaning. And when we have it, honestly, our brain starts to organize our attention, our energy, and even our emotions in more consistent ways. The prefrontal cortex, which basically helps us plan, evaluate, and make decisions, becomes more activated when we're engaging with goals that feel more aligned with our values, not just what we're doing. We're also looking at why we're doing them. And guess what? It's not just cognitive. So basically, people with a strong sense of meaning show better emotional regulation, lower levels of stress-related inflammation, and increased resilience under pressure. So for us, this will look like going from, oh, I should eat healthier, to actually, I want to feel strong enough to serve others well, or from actually, I need to save more, to I'm building a life of financial peace so I can leave a legacy. It's subtle, but when we ask God to literally help us root our habits in something deeper than image or, for example, pressure, the discipline starts to feel different, right? So purpose energizes us. It gives habits emotional weight. So what's powerful is this: when we shift our pressure to purpose, our habits start to align with our identity, not just our to-do list. Next, we know sleep is important, right? But most of us still treat it like a luxury. In reality, it's the baseline that every other habit rests on. So during deep sleep, the brain pretty much clears out metabolic waste, right, through a system called the glymphatic system. I've mentioned this before. So that process literally helps protect long-term cognitive function. But it doesn't just stop there. So sleep actually regulates the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes emotional stimuli, right, and strengthens memory consolidation in the hippocampus. So we're not just more rested, we're more emotionally balanced. So the change for us doesn't need to be dramatic. Honestly, it doesn't. Even giving ourselves a consistent bedtime or switching to low warm lighting after like 8 p.m, for example, can start to really just retrain our circadian rhythm to wind down. In fact, one study found that people who increased their sleep by just 45 minutes a night reported improved mood, better impulse control, and even reduced late night spending. Can you imagine? So when we sleep well, our decisions feel clearer, our cravings soften, our brain feels less like it's glitching under pressure. So one thing we can hold on to is this, right? Good habits stick better when we're well rested enough to actually feel them working. Okay, so next I started prioritizing exercise. Movement does a lot more than just change our body, it transforms our brain. So when we exercise even lightly, right, we release a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it's like brain fertilizer, right? It supports learning, emotional regulation, and even neuroplasticity. So the brain's ability to adapt and rewire itself. And at the same time, exercise reduces stress hormones, right, like cortisol, and increases dopamine and serotonin, which regulate mood, focus, and emotional stability. Okay, so here's something slightly wild. But just 10 minutes of like walking quickly can actually boost our cognitive performance, even more than a cup of coffee. So when we shift from viewing exercise as punishment to a form of mental clarity, it changes everything. So for us, it might be taking a walk after a hard meeting, or, dancing in the kitchen just to shake off the stress. Like, it doesn't have to be about sculpting anything, it's more about creating space for stillness through movement. And the bonus, guess what? The more consistent we are, the more our prefrontal cortex strengthens, helping us plan, resist distractions, and make better long-term decisions. Ultimately, movement becomes less about control and more about clarity. So it's a way we remind our brain that actually we're safe, we're strong, and we're still becoming. So this next point is that I learned to eat with more awareness, right? So we often eat with autopilot, some of us, and that's driven by cues, emotion, and habit loops we don't even notice. But when we slow down, the brain starts to catch up. So this is where the concept of introspective awareness comes in. It's our ability to sense internal signals like hunger, fullness, and emotional shifts. And studies show people with higher interoceptive awareness have better impulse control, right? And fewer Yeah, and fewer episodes of emotional eating. So eating with awareness doesn't mean tracking every single calorie. Honestly, for us, it might look like eating and then checking in with how we feel, or asking, hold on, am I still eating because I'm hungry? Or am I trying to soothe something here? Powerful question. And you know what? Even praying over our meals or playing like calm background music can really just help us bring ourselves back to the moment. And you know what? Funny enough, distraction eating has actually been linked to higher food intake and reduced satisfaction. So it's not just what we eat, it really is about how we experience it that shapes the habit. So what we can take away from this is simple. When we return to present while we eat, food becomes nourishment again, not just noise. Okay, so something else that I can see is impacting my life a bit more positively is me trying to be a bit more consistent with my prayer life. So prayer doesn't just calm the heart, honestly, it also changes the brain. So research shows that regular spiritual practices activate areas in the parietal lobe and the medial prefrontal cortex. These are brain regions involved in self-reflection, compassion, and meaning making. And also consistent prayer has actually been shown to reduce stress responses, right? And foster like a greater sense of emotional resilience and hope. So especially during uncertainty. So sometimes we might think prayer has to look a certain way, but for us, it might actually just be taking like 5 minutes just to be still, speaking honestly with God, or even writing down our prayers when we can't find any words. So something I'm going to basically lean into more is being a bit more consistent with my prayer life, because I know how much it's helped me. So what I'm basically trying to say here is that prayer repositions our heart and reminds our brain of who's in control, right? It's not just regulation, it's restoration. So in the end, prayer basically just reminds me that I'm not actually the source of my strength, and knowing that brings me so much peace. So it's something I can return to again and again and again. Okay, so I set digital boundaries. Our brains weren't built to process hundreds of updates, reels, and notifications every single day. When we're constantly switching between digital inputs, right, we basically increase something called attentional residue. So it's a cognitive state where our brain stays partially stuck on what we were just doing, right, even after we move on. So this not only reduces focus, honestly, it also heightens anxiety, can interrupt our natural dopamine rhythms, and over time, I feel like it can really just create a kind of digital burnout that feels like mental fog, decision fatigue, and even like emotional flatness. So what helps is not necessarily quitting social media, it's more like creating small routines to basically interrupt the loop. So for example, turning off push notifications, using the app timers, just charging like the phone in a different room overnight. It's not about being rigid, it really isn't. It's about reclaiming our attention and offering our brain space to be bored, inspired, or just still. So one thing we might hold on to is this, right? The more we protect our peace from constant pings, the more our brain can start to actually just rest into the present. Okay, so that follows on nicely to the next point, which is basically reaching out to friends and family and just reconnecting and having that human bond again. So basically, social connection isn't just a nice to have, it's essential for emotional health. So when we connect with loved ones, our brain basically releases oxytocin, which supports bonding and reduces stress, right? So at the same time, consistent emotional support has been shown to really strengthen our vagus nerve, which is a key player in the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us calm down and feel safe. And you know what? Here's an interesting point according to research. So loneliness has actually been found to increase mortality risk by up to 26%. So that's higher than like obesity or physical inactivity. So this doesn't mean we have to have like 1,000 friendships. Honestly, it doesn't. It might look like just reaching out to your close friends, your close family, planning a dinner, catching up with them, or even just asking someone how they're really doing and listening without multitasking. So sometimes we think emotional wellness means solo self-work, right? But we weren't built to heal alone. And what's reassuring is this: when we tend to the relationships that nourish us, we remind our nervous system that actually we're not alone and we don't have to carry it all ourselves. Okay, so there's a reason we think more clearly on our walk when we move forward at a steady pace. So our brain enters a default mode state, the network basically responsible for daydreaming, processing emotions, and reflecting on our experiences. So this rhythm activates the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, which is basically supporting both memory and perspective. So we don't need a podcast, a step count, or a reason, right? Just 15 minutes sometimes outside with like just walking can really just lift our mood and shape our thinking. And nature adds an additional layer, right? So natural sunlight helps regulate our circadian rhythm, and green spaces have been shown to really reduce cortisol and just overthinking. So it's not about necessarily reaching a goal, it's more about just becoming more attuned with ourselves. So there's just something so powerful about walking just for the sake of walking and not necessarily having a goal. So it basically tells our nervous system that, you know what, you're here and you're okay. So basically at the core of it, walking just helps us become a lot more present. So another habit that I've been sticking to religiously is making sure that I laugh as much as I can. So laughter isn't just a reaction, it's a natural regulator of the nervous system, right? So when we laugh, our brain releases a mix of endorphins, dopamine, and serotonin, lifting our mood and literally lowering like physical tension. So more interestingly, shared laughter has actually been shown to strengthen like group bonds and reduce the perception of threat. So reminding us we're safe, seen, and supported. So we don't need to force laughter, but we can actually just invite it in a bit more. So watching a funny show, replaying that TikTok your friend has sent you, or do you know what, even speaking to friends and family that actually make you smile, laugh, and make you feel really happy. So humor won't fix everything, it won't, but it can definitely interrupt the spiral sometimes. So one thing to remember is this: joy doesn't make us less serious or less focused. It actually just makes us feel more whole. Okay, so something else that's really helped is basically just learning to be alone by myself and appreciate my alone time. So as much as friends, family, and just everyone else is really needed in life, I understand that, you know what, sometimes you need to actually learn how to love your own company as well as having those connections. So when we step away from like constant inputs, the brain activates the default mode network, right? Which is the circuit involved in self-reflection, identity formation, and meaning making. So without silence, sometimes that network can stay crowded, right? And we just lose access to deeper insight. So alone time isn't just about being antisocial. Honestly, that's not it at all. But it's just really connecting with like your inner rhythm. So that might mean journaling for like 10 minutes without music, or, you know, just really stepping away and having time away from your phone. So instead of thinking alone time is indulgent, no, what if we saw it more as maintenance? So in the end, when we spend just a few moments by ourselves, it just gives us a lot more time to really just reflect on our thoughts and just connect with ourselves again. Okay, so next, I started learning for enjoyment again. I absolutely love learning. I've always like learned something to earn a qualification, right? It wasn't until I was speaking to this guy and he basically tries to learn something new every year, and that really just made me think, actually, there's so much more that I don't know. And, you know, there's some things that you need to do and not necessarily earn a qualification for. So once I sort of understood that, I took that so seriously. So I started learning swimming, started learning how to cook like different foods. I started learning languages, and it's just been so good. So when we learn something new, not for like productivity, but just for pleasure, we can actually reactivate the brain's curiosity loop. So when we learn something new, not just for productivity, but pleasure, we reactivate the brain's curiosity loop. So this involves the hippocampus, which is associated with memory, the nucleus accumbens, which is associated with rewards, and the ventral tegmental area, which is associated with motivation. So learning becomes joyful, like not just a chore. So what I'm trying to say here, learning for enjoyment can look like, for example, watching a documentary that you find really interesting, or practicing a new recipe, right? Or learning to say thank you in 3 different languages, because why not? When we switch from consuming to creating, even just a little, the brain lights up in new ways. So something you could like try is this: learn something new with your hands, learn something new with your eyes, learn something with your ears. Honestly, that's how we stretch different parts of the brain. And what's beautiful is this: learning reminds us that we're still growing, still capable of so much more. And finally, I made God my anchor again. So when life becomes really overwhelming, right, it's so easy to believe that we're carrying all this pressure by ourselves. But when we bring our stress to Christ, the burden shifts. So prayer, scripture, and spiritual reflections have been shown to actually activate the prefrontal cortex, helping us emotionally regulate and find grounded perspective. And they also reduce activation in the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, so making it easier to return to calmness. So for me, anchoring in God looks like listening to worship music, or reading a scripture, or listening to a sermon, right? These moments don't just soothe me, but they really just recalibrate my identity. So when I feel unsteady, something that I'm even going to try and do more is asking God to basically just remind me who I am in Him. So what I'm trying to say here is basically anchoring my life to Christ has just really brought so much calmness and peace to my life, and has allowed me to just push further and just do more. So honestly, sometimes we don't need to change every single aspect of our life, right? We actually don't. Sometimes it's just a gentle shift, like a single new habit that begins to rebuild how we feel, how we show up, and how we move through the world. Not every season will feel easy, right? But these habits become anchors. And even when things feel unpredictable, they remind me that, you know what, we're allowed to reset again and again and again. So these habits aren't just about becoming someone new, they're not. It's more about returning just to who God made us to be, right? With clarity, joy, and peace. Okay, so if this video helped you, check out the wellbeing guides below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.